set along the sides of the road were being set off as the fleeing infantry stepped on them. Lape was raking the area, firing profusely and being extravagant with a limited supply of ammunition we had. I was also greatly concerned about having our position spotted and being on the receiving end of a barrage of 88s and mortars. The burning tank was blocking the width of the road. Any succeeding tanks would have to find another way around it. The narrow road had a slight shoulder on each side, then tapered off into a deep ditch on each side. I told Leip to cease fire and to listen. If there was any more tanks approaching, in the distance I heard the distinct clattering of their threads as they maneuvered the deep snow and the ice-encrusted dirt. I was frustrated that I did not have a phone to relay on situation, but no matter, we were here to stay, one way or another. The intensity of the German artillery and a mortar barrage increased dramatically, which only signaled one thing. The Germans were mounting a full-scale attack on our position. I spotted more infantry moving on our position. Lape opened up on them, dispersing them into ditches. If he only had communications, we could have had our 80 millimeter mortars laid in on them and eliminate half of our problem. The rumbling of the tanks became louder, but as yet I could not detect any of them on the road ahead. The still burning Mark 5 was affording much light to the area. There was no need to fire a flare. There was no enemy infantry about, probably because they were still in the ditches or had followed them back to a safer place. I was still concerned about our left flank, but some strange reason I was not presenting a problem as far as advancing infantry using the same avenue to come upon us. I could now see the lead tank approaching the burned out tank of the Mark V. It had a large plow-like blade attached to it, and the tanker started to use it to plow to push the burning tank into the ditch off the road. It had succeeded, and the blades down and detonating the remaining mines into the road. So that other tank had like a big snow plow blade on it.
Yeah, and they just pushed it aside.
So he pushed the burning tank aside into the ditch, and then he came up with that big blade, and he was setting off the mines.
Yeah.
But the mines weren't hurting his tank.
The what?
The mines that he was detonating from the snow blade, the big blade on the front of his tank, wasn't hurting his tank.
Well, they weren't hurting the troops because they were destroying the mines.
No, I meant he had a big blade on the front of his tank, and he pushed that into the ditch.
Sometimes they had a revolving.
They had a revolving thing in front of the tank, and that would hit the mines.
Yeah.
And that wouldn't bother his tank. His tank was still doing fine.
Yeah.
So this guy is with the snow blade. He's moving in, setting off all the mines, and so the rest can keep on coming. The rumbling of tanks became louder. The voice shouted from behind, "Fall back, fall back." It was a paratrooper running among the holes, telling everyone to pull back. The tanks would be upon us in no time, and we were no match for them. We broke down the gun and grabbed the 2 boxes of ammo and scrambled out of the dugout, screaming Mimes, fired from the Nebelwerfer, were landing all over, and the German tanks started firing their 88s as we hightailed it out of there. We met post a little way back, tossed our gun into the trailer, and followed the paratroopers to the rearward position. It was then I noticed that 2 ammo bearers were missing. Sullivan related that they were both cut down. murderous mortar fire. I felt I had let them down, and I did not even know there were casualties, and I should have paid more attention to their needs, and even checked on them at times. I took for granted, for now I would never have the opportunity to express my gratitude for everything they've done for the squad and me. I would miss them terribly, and my thoughts went out to their loved ones. I made a promise to myself that at the first chance I would write a long letter to the respective relatives, informing them what great contribution they have made to the country and the fellow soldiers. We traveled about a mile and a half up the road, all the while was shelled by mortars and a WWII fire. Up ahead were several tanks, Shermans, hosts of TDs, tanks destroyers, and self-propelled guns. There were also many soldiers with bazookas forming a hastily defined defensive line. Jumping out of the Jeep, we retrieved the gun from the trailer, as much ammunition as we could carry. Post took off, presumably further to the rear. In our haste and confusion, we forgot to take our blankets or even our light packs. All we had was the gun, ammunition for it, and our individual weapons. A young second lieutenant wearing an 82nd Airborne shoulder patch came to us and gave us a short wave of his hand as a form of salutation and motioned for him to follow him. Set up your gun here, Sergeant, he spoke in a matter-of-fact manner, but don't dig in. You'll probably be pulling out shortly. With that, he was gone, dodging the mortar shells as he went about his business of setting other pieces in place for our defensive position. For a split second, I was impressed and inspired with the young lieutenant's leadership and demeanor. I would have set the gun in the middle of the road if he so desired. It was a leadership quality. I had not seen in a long time. It made me think all the more about transferring to Special Forces outfit, but likely many other thoughts I had I did not put it into reality. We hurriedly set the gun in a defiled position and sweeping away the snow from our boots. To our right and left was a couple of Shermans firing their short-barreled 75mm guns out in the front. One of the tankers struck his head out of the opening of the turret hatch, threw down a case of K-rations, and stated, "Don't let the SOBs get past you and give them hell." With that, he disappeared back into the tank. We were grateful for the rations and immediately opened them, as we had not eaten since morning. We could hear the familiar clanking and rumbling of the Mark IVs as they labored down toward the road. The tank with a plow on the front was sweeping up the mines away as we'd hear them go off occasionally. I checked the squad and they were all in prone position, sweating out the mortar fire. Our own artillery was keeping the rear troops and the Germans off balance. Since their mortar fire had decreased considerably, I motioned to them, "Get under the tanks if we started to get airburst if mortars increased in intensity." I did not like the idea of laying out in the open without even the barest protection of a slit trench or a foxhole. As the first Mark V came into view, there was a sound of many explosions going off at once. Our engineers had tied explosive charges around some of the large trees and would set them off when the tanks came near, bringing the large trees down among the tanks. German infantry would scatter in all directions and we would open fire. I could see the tracers finding their mark as they ignited on constant. The white camouflage coveralls spewing out the red fluid from beneath the tunics. Our own 81 millimeters increased crescendo along the 75s on the Shermans. Our 105s and 155s were also lobbing many sets of bursts, throwing mass confusion into the advancing Germans. I could hear the screams of pain as their bodies were torn apart by the metal fragments. I felt a short kinship with them as they made their horrible death. Tomorrow perhaps it'll be our turn, and some of them would feel the same anguish that we felt today. The young lieutenant came by quickly, looked around and said, "How are you doing?" Before I could say anything, he finished by saying they were pulling back once again, jumping on the tank. As we were breaking down the gun, the tanker who had given us direction struck his head out the hatch and shouted for us to throw the gun on the board and climb on. "Rap on the tank when you're ready." He stated that he once was gone. He stated and he was once and was gone once again. We quickly jammed the receiver of the tripod on the tank and climbed on. I signaled by hitting the shell of the tank with my rifle butt. The tank quickly spun around with a jerk, throwing snow and dirt into our faces. We held onto the tank and picked up speed, pulling our own collars and field jackets and shielding our bodies from the cold wind as much as possible. How fast could a tank go? How fast could a tank go?
Who?
How fast could a tank go? How fast speed could a tank go?
Tank?
Yeah, how fast?
Probably 30, 40 miles an hour.
And when you jumped on the tank, your buddy was giving you a ride. How fast was he going?
Same distance.
No, how fast was he going when the tanker said that he'll give you a ride?
Well, 40 miles an hour.
What did you hold on to?
Huh?
What did you hold on to? Was there something to hold on to on the outside?
Well, hold on to the rods or something on that tank.
Okay.
Handles or something.
We must have gone a good 2 miles before we stopped. I seen a signpost before we stopped. It was a village of Ezeri. There was a large clearing before the village, and this would make our next stand. The young lieutenant once told us to set up and try to dig in because we might be here the rest of the night. It was quiet and some of the tankers had gone into the village looking for warm billets. We were not that fortunately. The tank we had written on disappeared in the village, so we started to dig in. There were riflemen scattered along the perimeter at 50-yard intervals. I had not noticed the cold before, but as everything became relatively hushed and silent, I soon became aware of how cold I really was. I wondered where post was with our bedrolls and rations. Once again, the lieutenant came by and checked our position, hurriedly asked how we were holding up, and plunked down a pile of blankets onto the snow. "Merry Christmas," he smiled and was gone. I had forgotten completely that it was Christmas Eve. After distributing the blankets, I wrapped one of them around me. It felt good to feel warmth on my own body. The ground was too frozen to dig in the gun inadequately, so we piled large branches around the semicircle and camouflaged it as best as we could. I just came to the realization that we were shorthanded. Our squad was down to 4 men, counting Lape and myself. After having set up a makeshift guard roster for the rest of the night, I rested up against a large tree, knowing that I would not sleep because of the cold. Covering most of my body with a blanket, I waited for the warmth from my body to generate some heat. I closed my eyes and let the warmth soak in. I thought of my last Christmas at home. I had gone out that afternoon on Christmas Eve, bought a tree from the neighborhood lot for 50 cents, and decorated with our own tinsel and icicles from a box stored in the basement. I had made a wooden tree stand. After setting the tree up in front of the window in the living room, I secured it with 2 strings on each side of the window. Steve was home from college for the holidays, but he was not home very often. On the Christmas Eve, he had gone to Christmas parties at Jimmy Duncan's house. Put it on hold for a minute, Jen.
Okay.
I'm gonna take a water break.
Okay.